This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Go On Git!
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kylie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this is our Go On Git edition of the Baseline NBA podcast. We talk about all of the teams that got knocked out of the first round. What will the future behold for these teams? And listen, there's definitely one team that not only did they get knocked out of the first round, looks like their management organization took a severe knockout themselves too, kind of like Klitschko the other night. But I'm not going to get into all of that stuff. You know I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, my brother from another mother, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. www.shawsports.net is the place to be for his content. He rolls and owns it like no other. My brother, Mr. Warren Shaw. What is good, man?
I'm chilling, man. Salute to all the fans listeners to NBA Baseline. You know, this is a somber edition. You know, it's like the dearly departed edition, of the Baseline as we talk about these teams who did not acquit themselves well enough to advance past the first round of the NBA playoffs. Hey, thanks for making it. Thanks for coming in and playing. We've got some parting gifts for you guys, and we're going to go ahead and tell y'all to go and get.
Yeah, a lot of Velveeta. I got a lot of Velveeta to hand these teams, man. I mean, listen, not that we didn't think and predict that most of these guys were going to get knocked out to begin with, Shaw. I think what is a little bit more amazing is what we saw from the play and really what that's going to lead to in the offseason, because I do think that certain teams are going to have, I can't even put the proper words into effect on it, but there is going to be serious fallout, okay, that's going to take place because of what has transpired. And for some teams, we saw a little bit more than just them taking an L. I mean, they actually, looking pretty nice. I mean, maybe more so with more confidence going into next season that they will be a legitimate threat and can continue off of their efforts for what they achieved, not just in the second half of this past regular season, but what they accomplished in the first round of their series. So we got a lot that we're going to get into. Of course, we're going to be talking about all the teams that got knocked out of the first round, but really the big topic of conversation happens just shortly after, and it's going to be the team that we're going to be talking about first that has to go on and get, being the Indiana Pacers. I can't believe that even at this particular juncture, Larry Bird, the legend himself, who's been holding down the president of basketball operations for the Indiana Pacers for some years now, he's told him and his faction and his faithful and his fan base that he's going to go on and get. And that to me is what stands out first and foremost for us to discuss. What was your take from this, Shaw? And how do you think that this now affects the Indiana Pacers moving forward?
Yeah, well, if you listen and follow NBA Twitter, there's a lot of conversation about this as signifying, that the Pacers may be heading towards a rebuild finally. I find this to be very interesting that, Larry Bird, we all saw the cut scenes to him during the playoffs. He's just looking kind of all disenchanted and rubbing his head and just like, kind of just frustrated with the way the season has gone and how they didn't play well versus Cavaliers. And then, a couple of days later, you see him, in an F1, whatever race car, going into New York to try to get to petition the NBA to bring the All-Star game to Indiana. And this was a guy who's invested in staying with the Pacers organization. Now, again, he ends up stepping down and deciding that he's going to take a consulting role, but he doesn't want to be, the president of basketball operations anymore. And I think that's because he doesn't want to deal with the Paul George drama that's coming his way. The Pacers are in a very interesting situation where they only have $78 million in committed salary going into next year. But Jeff Teague still is a free agent. He's only making roughly about $9 million. He's going to be due to get, in that $14 to $15 million range. He's only 28 years old. So, he's going to want this to be kind of a big contract for him. And then they got to figure out if, what they do with Paul George. And I don't think Larry Bird wanted anything to do with it. So he says, you know what, maybe the game has passed me by. But he took a wrecking ball to this thing on his way out when you think about it, because Frank Vogel, he fell out last year. He brought in all these guys who he wanted to see them run a faster pace. It didn't really work out for them this year. They ended up with a 41-41 record, getting swept in the first round. And he's like, you know what? All right, cool, I'm out. You know what I mean? He's running off like he did at that three-point contest, 2 fingers in the air like peace. So to me, that's kind of bugged out for the Pacers and a little bit unfair. But I do think it signifies the beginning of a rebuild.
Well, listen, Larry Bird, it's hard to say because I have so much admiration and respect for Larry Bird and what he's done for the game of basketball. But When I've read and looked at a lot of the postings on television, things that I've seen through various articles that have been written through a plethora of different outlets. Listen, Larry Bird did not do a really great job as being president of basketball operations. He essentially dismantled the basketball team that made it to the Eastern Conference Finals 2 years consecutively with Paul George, David West, and Roy Hibbert. Um, it it kind of just boggles my mind a little bit because I want to say that Larry Bird was partially responsible for the Indiana Pacers being a successful basketball team for a good stretch of games, in considering that being in a small market post the Reggie Miller era. But this past season kind of marks as a black eye to the legacy of Larry Bird in the executive position. And it may pose a bigger question. And I think one day you and I will need to sit down and maybe have this as part of our show, Shaw, how legendary guys who have immersed themselves in the game so much, and we talk about how they can make such a contribution to the game, how they just can't seem to get it right when it comes to executing and making good, solid basketball decisions that suggest the longevity of an organization and the success of an organization. It's just been an incessant trend. Guys like Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and the jury is out on Magic Johnson considering that this is his opportunity, but he's had many positions prior to that lead you to believe that he may not be a sound person to make basketball decisions, but he could certainly be someone that could be the face of any basketball organization, right? And Larry Bird just falls right into that same fold. He's the likable guy, from Indiana, homegrown, everything. But the decisions that he's made over the past few seasons has led you to believe that maybe this is actually the best thing for the Indiana Pacers other than getting knocked out of the first round by the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, I don't. Obviously, you alluded to having a lot of respect for him, and we both do, and we need to. I mean, he is a former coach of the year. He's won executive of the year, in that role in Indiana as well too. But his last few seasons just haven't gone the way that I think he would have wanted to, or the Indiana organization would have wanted to. And I think it stems back, to they made it to the conference finals and got beat by Miami, and then Lance Stevenson, not wanting to pay him, or Lance wanting too much money, and that marriage kind of going south the way that it did, and never really being able to build the roster back the way that they wanted to. Then, of course, the horrific Paul George injury that set back the organization another season as well too. So again, they've had some difficulties, and had some things happen to them. And you're right, it might just really be time for him to kind of step away now and say, all right, I can be a consultant, but he's not going to be the head honcho making all the decision moves. I think it's Kevin Pritchard who's now going to take over and be the existing president.
Which probably was the best thing that Larry Bird did walking out the door, was bringing a guy like Kevin Pritchard in there, because Kevin Pritchard has a proven track record of building quality basketball teams.
Right, and that is what the jury is on him. So that's why everybody seems to signify now that, okay, this could mean that this Pacers team is going to actually rebuild now. And again, we just don't know what that looks like, because Monta Ellis still has 2 years on his contract. Thaddeus Young has 2 years on his contract. Jefferson has 2 years on his contract. Well, again, it's Teague and Aaron Brooks and some other peripheral guys who aren't guaranteed to come back. But you really got to figure out what to do with Paul George. And I think you're going to see a Paul George trade at least heavily discussed again leading up to the draft, and well deep into the summer as well, if it doesn't happen, by June 20, whatever it is, June 22nd or June 23rd, whenever the draft is. I really feel like Paul George is not going to be a Pacer going into next season.
Well, listen, you know what, Sean? Maybe that might not be such a bad thing, because, I go back to Danny Granger, and I go back to Al Harrington. To me, these guys are quality guys that I don't know if they were ever fully embraced by the Indiana Pacer faithful. And that's not to, and listen, when I say this, I'm not saying that, it's all Paul George's fault and it's all the fans' fault or anything. Sometimes there are just some players that their talent, they're like, wow, we're really glad that this guy is on our team. And then, as they kind of look at it through the course of a season or maybe even a short-term career, like with Paul George, you sit there and say, I don't know if he's really one of us. He wasn't like Reggie Miller, or, he wasn't like an Antonio Davis or a Dale Davis, you know what I mean? Or like a Detlef Schrempf. Like, it didn't take long for the fan base to embrace, their star players. And I don't know where it went wrong. I feel like Indiana fans embrace Lance Stevenson more than they embrace Paul George. So I think in many respects, this might actually be a good thing for the Indiana Pacers that they figure out a way to move Paul George, because you got the likes of Glenn Robinson III, who, we've been hearing for the last couple of years that, this guy should be doing things right now in the NBA, albeit I don't know if he's going to be able to do that under the tutelage of Nate McMillan, but you certainly are not going to be able to see that as long as he continues to play in the shadow of Paul George. I think if you pair him up next to a Miles Turner, now you're looking at a combination of a youth movement that might bode better to seeing where this team might be in the next coming years than to continue to harp back on still trying to build around Paul George, or maybe even the sentiment that you're going to solely build it on Miles Turner, which I don't think is completely a good thing either. The signing of Monte Ellis, it's time to move him along. Aaron Brooks, what is he there for? They drafted Raheem Christmas. You remember we interviewed Raheem Christmas. We figured this guy would be a real good plug-and-play type player offering some quality minutes. Where is he going to find the opportunity to do that when you still got Lavoy Allen? You know what I'm saying? And Thaddeus Young. I think at this particular moment, Shaw, you need to start letting go of this patchwork with you. Like, you know how I am about this. If you're not going all in on the guys you're bringing to this roster to make a move, then don't go all in. But don't half-ass your way and think you're going to sell people like the Indiana faithful on the idea that this was going to be a quality product that just gets you into the playoffs, but then they get pimp slapped by the Cleveland Cavaliers. Indiana fans don't want that. So I think this actually is a good thing, because the writing is on the wall that the Pacers need to get younger. And when I say younger, they've got young players that they need to put on that basketball court. Let's see what they can do.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much of that we'll actually see, because, again, I think Paul George has bristled a little bit, and maybe he's worn thin on some of the Pacer faithful. And maybe he's trying to force his way out. And I said this before, that, again, there's something about him that, I think he's an elite player. I just don't think he's an elite leader. And I don't know that he can be the guy. I think he can be your number two guy. Obviously, he's a great talent, a great scorer, and two-way player and all that. But there's just something about him that seems a little bit off for me, just for me. And again, if this signifies the beginning of the end, then so be it. But they still, like I said, Thaddeus Young, Monte Ellis, Al Jefferson, those are they're movable contracts. But those guys are, if Thaddeus Young is going to be 29, Monta and Al Jefferson are in their early 30s already, and we know Jefferson has a history of injuries, who's going to take those guys on if you're trying to get younger? And I agree with you. I'm not too sure about building around Miles Turner. Again, I like the kid. I think he's a great player, but he needs somebody else to kind of help him along as well, too. So if they move George, they probably get some nice young pieces, and obviously the Lakers are going to be that first call if that's what they decide to do. And then maybe they bring in some of those young guys that the Lakers have over there and try to bring them along. But again, this is all speculative for now, but the Pacers bowed out in 4 games, and they have a lot to consider over the summer.
Definitely. You're tuned to the Baseline. Khalid, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our Go On Git edition of the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. All right, Shaw. Next team up that's on our Go On and Git list. The Chicago Bulls. Where do we begin, Shaw, with the Chicago Bulls? Who would have thought that the Chicago Bulls hinged their playoff hopes on the most unlikely basketball player to expose the fallacy of this roster, Rajon Rondo? Man, let me tell you something. It's so sweet. It's so sweet. I love every minute of this, Shaw. I love every single minute of how justified now it should be. I don't want to hear people yickety-yakking, talking about how Rajon Rondo's game is trash. I don't want to hear anything about how Rajon Rondo shouldn't be playing in the NBA. I don't want to hear any of that. It's got nothing to do with it, because Rajon Rondo once again proved that you do not have to have all of the skills that we see from the Steph Currys, the Chris Pauls, and all these. You play the game the way it needs to be played at his position. And when you don't have a comparable backup for what he does, then you see what happened to the Chicago Bulls the next 4 games in that first round playoff series against the Boston Celtics. I'm going to step off the podium for a second, Shaw, because I'll go 15 minutes on my tirade. So I'm going to let you get yours in right now. You know what I'm saying? Just make sure your licks are good. But I just want to make that preference be known. Rajon Rondo was the only reason why the Chicago Bulls even survived in that series against the Boston Celtics.
And again, it's hard to disagree with that fact at this point. 2 games with Rondo, 2 wins, 4 games without him, all L's. So, I'm not going to belabor the Bulls. I mean, I think if you've been listening to our show, I'm not a big fan of this organization and this team. And I was surprised that they were able to get those 2 wins to begin with, But all I'll say is that where do they go from here? Mirotic is a free agent. MCW is a free agent. Dwayne Wade has a player option. Rondo has the weird player and team option at $13.3 million. So what do they do with that? Did he prove himself worthy enough now on their side where, okay, they want to keep him? Because if it's not to say that he obviously was very valuable in the playoffs, but do they want to continue with this roster as is? The same thing as we just talked about with Paul George, Jimmy Butler conversation is going to be had again as well too. The rest of this roster is pretty porous, and there's really not a lot to it. There's not a lot of grit and a lot of meat to it. Bobby Portis isn't somebody that you're building around, though he's a nice player, nice rotation guy. Felicio is also a free agent this summer as well too. They have to figure out what they want to do first and foremost at the top, and a lot of it is going to start with Wade, whether or not he opts into his contract, whether they want to keep Butler, and what they really ultimately want to do with Rondo as well. Because if they all decide that if they're going to blow up with those 3 guys, that means Robin Lopez probably his contract becomes available as well too. So for me, Chicago's in a very, very tenuous situation. I just don't like this organization currently as it stands, and I think they should start over. But I just don't think Gar Foreman, Gar Pax, whatever it is, I just don't feel like they're going to do that. They have this history of hey, we make the playoffs, we get in here, and we're a competitive organization. But I just don't think they're going anywhere.
Maybe we should have a Go On and Get executive edition of the Baseline.
A lot of people in Chicago have been screaming for that.
Right?
For sure.
Like Foreman and Paxson. Go On Get. Seriously. The decisions that these guys have made has been atrocious, okay? And I don't know what's the motivation or the drive behind it, but clearly it is a contradiction to the competitive nature and the winning spirit that faithful fans in the Chicago area, Chicago Bull fans faithful, have been accustomed to. And listen, we can get into all of that nonsense about, the post-Jordan era and all that. Let's remember, they had Derrick Rose. They had Tom Thibodeau. Somewhere, somehow, along the lines, it just went all wrong, okay? The Fred Hoiberg project, the Fred Hoiberg experiment, call it what you want. I don't know how much longer this is going to last. I will tell you that Rajon Rondo surely made Fred Hoiberg look a hell of a lot better than Fred Hoiberg making any of the other players on that roster better during the course of that series. And so, to me, this is where it starts. It really starts with what is the actual what is the identity of the Chicago Bulls basketball team? Because you got way too many moving parts here, Shaw. And I don't mean by moving talking about from a trade perspective. I'm talking about moving parts in their personalities, their mindset, the way that they go about their business, preparing to play basketball games. Rajon Rondo is the type of guy where he needs to be a floor general, and he needs to be matched up with someone that identifies the way that he goes about leading his guys. There's something to be said where more people were talking about Rajon working with the D-leaguers and a lot of the bench players than worrying about running with the starting lineup, right? I mean, that tells me something about, where Jimmy Butler's mindset at, because in the beginning I said, I'm more about Jimmy Butler being a leader and a go-getter because of the things that he did out loud in front of the media than what I have seen and what he showed me through the course of the first round of this series. And Dwayne Wade, listen, I got nothing to say about Dwayne Wade. Well, listen, I love the man. He's done wonderful things. I just felt like in some respects he was much of a cancer to this team, because all of the things that I thought that he was easily giving to LeBron James in the 4 years that he played as a Miami Heat, he suddenly couldn't give that to these guys here in the Chicago Bulls enough to make them competitive after the first 2 games when they lost Rajon Rondo. That's what I'm saying. That's where a lot of the confusion sets to me when I look at this basketball team. So as far as I'm concerned, if this team needs to get stripped and broken down, I think it just needs to get broken down completely. The relationship between Hoiberg and Butler is tarnished. That needs to go. The relationship with Wade and Hoiberg, tarnished. That needs to go. Rajon and Hoiberg, that needs to go. I just feel like something has to give, and you need to start, charting a different path and a more direct narrative about what the Chicago Bulls team needs to be. And if it means maybe losing a Nikola Mirotic, if it means losing, a guy like Bobby Portis at the expense of doing it, so be it. But this is a tainted, contaminated roster that has to be quarantined from the rest of any conversation that we're talking about going into next season about them being competitive and doing anything in any division in the NBA.
Well, the final thing I'll say about Chicago Bulls is if they would have won that first round series against the Boston Celtics, it would have been more of an indictment on Boston than I would have given Chicago credit.
Exactly.
Like, that's all I can say about it. I still don't think the
been
Chicago
burning
team is
Ainge
good.
effigies and looking at Brad Stevens upside down, funny sideways on how he could allow something like this to occur. But we said that this could be the worst possible matchup for a Boston Celtics team that has struggled to get out of the first round of the playoffs because they're playing against playoff veteran-laden guys that can smell blood in the water, which they did had it not been for the injury to Rajon Rondo.
Yep. Well, all right. I'm done with the Bulls, man. Let's move on.
All right. Let's go ahead and focus our attention to the Atlanta Hawks. And, you know, Shaw, we said this, that if the Washington Wizards take care of their business, they should move on past the Atlanta Hawks. I give kudos, you know, to Dennis Schroeder, you know, for showing like he can, you know, he wanted to act all Brody up against John Wall and everything like that. Paul Millsap excusing the Markieff Morris comments. It was a little bit, you know what I'm saying? There was a little bit of chirping going on, which made it an easy to digest series to watch. But this was a totally dominated series by the Washington Wizards. And once again, we're left with an Atlanta Hawks team that just seems to sit in the middle of things, but hasn't completely fallen over and isn't completely plugging the holes on their capsized boat either. What do we make of this Atlanta Hawks team?
Well, I mean, it's like the same song and dance. You know, they're going to be back.
Oh, you mean the A? You know what I'm saying? That dunk song and dance like in the A? Oh,
it's just like, you know, Millsap has said, yeah, he's going to opt out because he's 32. So he wants to make, you know, get a nice extension, you know, and he probably saying that he's going to stay with Atlanta. And that's great. You know, I'm sure the Hawks will be happy to bring him back and all of that. We don't know what's going to happen with Tim Hardaway Jr. You know, they're saying right now they want to bring him back as well, too, but they already have $90 million of committed salary next year. You know, just don't know what kind of raise Millsap ends up getting. And then what ends up happening with the rest of this roster. Again, Schroeder played very well. You know, for in this playoff series against John Wall. And I think this was a shooter that they wanted to see kind of the entire regular season. But at least he saved his best for last, if you will, in terms of acquitting himself extremely well in the playoffs. But if he plays like this or even near that level, you know, maybe they're not, you know, the 5 seed, if you will. Maybe they can get home court advantage and have a run to, you know, to have better position moving forward. But for me, I'm just kind of tired of this Hawks team, you know, just kind of being middling. And but that's who they continue to be. You know, very much like the Memphis Grizzlies and very much like the LA Clippers, where they make it every year, but they don't really go and do a whole lot with it. I think we're going to see them come back and do the exact same thing again, especially with how some of the exit interviews have gone. Although I'd really love to see Millsap move on from this organization, see if they can do something with Dwight Howard, and move him along somewhere else as well too. Or if not, then let him be there and then, you know, kind of, you know, be part of the rebuilding process, even though he's already won it. He may not like it. I just don't really like much about what the Hawks are doing currently with their team. You know, they're not a bad organization like I think Chicago was kind of bad and tarnished on the interior, but it's just kind of tired of seeing them do the exact same thing over and over.
Well, listen, it's tough, man, because when you have an organization like the Atlanta Hawks who have suffered so long of being a less than average basketball team, you know, and Shaw, we talk about this a lot. You know, we did this with the Memphis Grizzlies, right? There comes a point where you start looking at this roster and you keep saying to yourself, all right, are you guys really willing to take the next step, or are you just happy, you know, being the status quo, right? And this is across the board with a lot of organizations. They're afraid to lose what they have. So they don't want to, you know, roll the dice. They don't want to go for broke. You know, maybe teams like the Boston Celtics can afford to do that because they've got tradition and history on their side, and fans can exercise a level of patience. They can be demanding, but are you going to argue with the symbol? Are you going to argue with what the intent should be? At the end, they know that it's about getting to a championship. And so if it means that they got to lose 5 or 6 seasons to do it, they can always roll back and say, well, listen, I had my man Bill Russell sporting 11 rings. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how true fans really are, that have history and tradition. And the Atlanta Hawks, prior to Dominique Wilkins, okay, they have not had the luxury of talking about traditionally being a great franchise, traditionally being a competitive basketball team. And so here they have this nice little run where they're an above 500 team. They win the Southeast a couple of times. They get into the playoffs and get past the first round a couple of times. Hell, they even get to the Eastern Conference Finals, right? But for all of that it's worth, at some point it's got to mean that they need to get to an NBA Finals. And when you look at this roster, what exactly on this roster is jumping out and telling you that this is a team destined to go to an NBA Finals? I mean, seriously, Dwight Howard, right? Like, seriously, like, who on this roster? Kent Bazemore? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's nobody on this roster that has the fortitude of wanting to put a team and an organization on its back and ride them off into the sunset. They ain't got no, Ryan, you know what I'm saying? Matty Ice. They ain't got no Matty Ice on this team yet, right? And in actuality, you can make an argument that Dennis Schroeder's path to greatness is something similar to what you've seen from Matt Ryan in the Atlanta Falcons. Look how long it took Matt Ryan before he actually got the Atlanta Falcons to a Super Bowl championship berth, right? So that's what I'm saying. That, you may have it with Dennis Schroeder. We don't know yet. But certainly, to your point, Shaw, what he showed you in the first round of this playoffs against the Washington Wizards team, a very solid Washington Wizards team, by the way, can give you optimism. But I don't know if it's going to be optimal with the likes of Paul Millsap, the likes of Dwight Howard. There's something that's going to have to give. And unfortunately, they're stuck in a situation from a cap perspective where the pieces are not going to be movable for the next couple of years before that door opens up. So it could be we're more enamored with what Dennis Schroeder does with what he's working with before we actually see them shake the foundation and the core to actually say that they are committed to putting together a championship team.
Yeah, that's not what I'll say on it. You just alluded to their cap situation. Right now, Millsap's 21.4 is a cap hold for them. He's going to opt out, so then he's going to be in the range of, I think, around 25 or 26 million dollars. That puts them at roughly 95 million in committed salary. Tim Hardaway is going to get a raise. So you figure he's got to get somewhere between 10 and maybe 12 million, and that's lowballing him right now, especially for what today's market is. So then that puts them at 105 million. The cap is expected to be about 108. So then where do you go from there? You already owe Kent Bazemore 16.9 next year. Ilyasova's a free agent. Humphries is a free agent. Sefolosha's a free agent. So you bring him back. What do you bring him back at? To me, so then you're looking at a core of Howard, Millsap, Bazemore, and Schroeder, and maybe Tim Hardaway Jr. Is that an elite team in the Eastern Conference? And the answer to that is no. So why pay $100+ million for that roster that doesn't really get you anywhere than a lower half seed in the Eastern Conference at best? And other teams are going to be getting better, and you're going to have a cap hold with guys that are pretty much plus 30 when you look at Howard and Millsap. Bazemore is going to be 30 in a few years already. Schroeder's obviously still young. I think the biggest young guy that they have on this team is if you retain Hardaway, can he continue to go on that upward swing that he showed this year? But it would be Taurean Prince probably as their biggest nugget, as somebody who can try to develop into a really good player. So for me, that's just not exciting. And that's why I think Atlanta should really try to figure out some other way. But we say this at the end of every year, if you will, when it comes to playoffs. And and I'll go ahead and jump ahead a little bit here. To me, the only teams that you're excited about, say, hey, come back, run it back and see what you can do next year, is a team like that got eliminated in the first round, is the Milwaukee Bucks. And then maybe you can argue the Portland Trailblazers as well. Everybody else, you're just like, all right, dudes, it's kind of the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, dust this thing off and start anew. But I don't think not many of these teams are going to take that direction.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the Milwaukee Bucks too, Shaw. I mean, great segue into the next and final team as far as the Eastern Conference teams that got eliminated in the first round. This Milwaukee Bucks team losing Jabari Parker, not having Chris Middleton for most of the regular season, the emergence of Giannis Antetokounmpo, the emergence of the Prez Malcolm Brogdon, Thon Maker coming into his own, being strapped with the money that they threw out for Greg Monroe. He actually showed a little something in this playoff first round against the Toronto Raptors. And to your point, Shaw, I completely agree with you. If there's a team out of all of these teams that we've been talking about so far that has some kind of upside that you can feel good about, that they can put some more pieces around the emergence of Jason Kidd and his coaching acumen and what he was able to do with this roster with all of the injuries that they sustained. This Milwaukee Bucks team is a dangerous team. But you know what? I'm gonna play devil's advocate, Shaw. It's not like we haven't said this before now. Now we're getting into like the second and third year where we're talking about the potential of this basketball team. It was the potential of this basketball team that forced Hammond to get Greg Monroe in the offseason, which didn't pan out very well. And again, injury to to Jabari Parker, injury to Chris Middleton. You start saying to yourself, man, can these guys stay healthy? And the next thing you know, we're going to be talking about this basketball team like we talk about the Los Angeles Clippers.
Well, for me, with the Milwaukee Bucks, expectations are mofo, right? It's like 2 years ago they made the playoffs, and they're like, okay, this team is really on the come up. Last year they play horrifically, just forget all their defensive principles altogether. This year Giannis develops into like that dude. Like, he is legitimately one of the best players in the NBA. Still only 22 years old. Still room to grow into this. Now, when we talk about Milwaukee just going to kind of run it back, they almost don't have a choice, because they are already at $108 million committed in salary next year. Now, they get a huge cap relief if Greg Monroe were to opt out of the $17.9 that he's owed, and Spencer Hawes also has an opt-out clause of $6.6 million even. Hawes is not opting out of that. You know what I mean? There's no way he's giving up that money, even for the opportunity to get more years. He's not opting out of that $6 million, so that much is there. Monroe, we're not too sure about. 17.9, he's 26 years old. He might try to go for a couple more years as opposed to just having 17.9. Or he may say, you know what, let me opt in, and hopefully that they put me back into the rotation. The biggest question I have for them, though, really is what happens with John Henson. We talked about it a lot on the show where we had, General Manager Hammond on this, and Henson was one of the guys. He said, we want to build around him as part of our kind of core four guys. And I was a little bit shocked to see that. But Jason Kidd fell out of love with Henson and didn't really play him at all. We didn't see him at all in the playoffs. So I don't know where his standing is moving forward. And then again, they're coming into a big year with Jabari Parker, will be in the final year of his rookie deal. He has to come back. And, I think for all intents and purposes, it's going to take him, roughly 10 to 12 months to get back from his injury. That's not going to give him a full season going into next year. And then they got to make an opinion on how much they're going to offer him to try to re-sign him after his rookie scale deal is up. So Milwaukee's in a very interesting situation, although they are going to run it back almost because they have to. They still have some questions that they have to answer, and a lot of it starts with Jabari Parker and Greg Monroe.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this roster, Shaw, it's almost like a motley crew, right? A little bit. Like, there's so many anomalies when you look at, Matthew Dellavedova to Jason Terry, right? Like Mirza Teletovic to Michael Beasley. Like, it was almost like they were drawing at straws just to fix whatever could be fixed at the particular time. And I don't know if they've even given themselves enough time to allow some of the talent to kind of emerge, and I think that's going to be a question that's going to have to be answered when you look at this roster, because listen, you start doing too many moves and you're going to fall into the same trap that the Atlanta Hawks have fallen into, right? You're going to have guys overcommitted, guys stuck on player options, and then you're going to be stuck with cap that you can't make serious moves and serious plays for certain guys that will be available in the offseason, where people are going to be like, well, why can't we get this guy? Why didn't you make a move to get that guy? You know what I'm saying? Like, if every team right now that's been ousted in the first round has the luxury of what like the Boston Celtics have, and I know people are going to start talking about, oh, well, you can thank the Brooklyn Nets for that. Yes, I understand that. But I will give some credit to Danny Ainge, because he did do some things correct with the talent that he's brought in there. He's not overcommitted to some of these guys. So now he has cap room, and he can go out in the free agency to get that player in the offseason that might be the over-the-top player that they need, right?
Let me stop you there real quick, though, because I think the one thing that, in giving credit to General Manager Hammond here is that, hey, well, he went and took a chance on a guy like Malcolm Brogdon. He went and reached for Thon Maker, and we all thought that was an extreme reach, to go get a guy like that, but he shows some signs as well too. So he's continued to build some young pieces around him, and that at least those guys their contracts aren't coming up for at least a couple of years now, so they're good where that's concerned. So that part of it is good. But you're right. We said earlier on in the segment where they were almost pressured into trying to get Greg Monroe. Like, they needed a big man. He was available. Right. It was kind of a splashy signing at the time, and they made it work.
That is the point that they regret it a little bit. That is the point that I'm trying to make, Shaw. Like, we're not talking about some key acquisition guys that Hammond has made that he had, because they're not playing, right? Because you're still finding minutes for Michael Beasley. You're still finding minutes for Terry and Telelovich and Tony Snell. You get what I'm saying? Like, these are guys that have been playing on other teams that didn't make it on those other rosters, or else they'd be playing with those other teams. But now they're here in Milwaukee. And while we're sitting here trying to fixate ourselves on, well, when are these guys going to step up and do things? Here are these little unknown guys like Malcolm Brogdon and Thon Maker, Gary Payton II. These guys are coming in and doing those things. And at the end, we're going to be saying, well, why aren't those guys getting minutes? And then you look at the contracts and the players that are associated to the contract, and you're saying, oh, that's why. And then next thing you know, when it's time for them to shed these guys, they get bogged down for another 2-3 more years before they can actually show flexibility and make moves. By that time frame, some of this talent may wither away. Ergo John Henson. How many times have we been saying over the last couple of years, Shaw, that John Henson should have been seeing a lot more minutes, but for some reason, they would not keep him on the basketball court. Then when you think that John Henson's actually supposed to get those minutes freed up, right, after they moved a couple of their front court players, they go and they sign Greg Monroe. So obviously we thought, well, something's going on with Henson, and we thought that he's on his way out the door. But here he sits still with this basketball team. Now he's not even playing minutes on this team, which I think he could have definitely helped contribute against a team like the Toronto Raptors. If we thought that his offense is a liability, his defense in the interior sure could have helped him in that first round.
So we don't want to preach all doom and gloom here with the Bucks. Again, this is an organization that we still think has a lot of promise. Obviously, if Middleton can come back and be healthy for all of next year, if Parker comes back and is healthy as well too, with Giannis, they're going to be fine with Brogdon and Thon Maker as well too. Tony Snell is also a free agent, so that's something that they'll have to consider whether or not they want to bring him back. Don't know what kind of salary he's going to command, but again, they are a little bit strapped when it comes to how much money they're going to be able to spend unless they move some salary around or if Greg Monroe opts out of his contract. So otherwise, it should be all good for Milwaukee. They should be able to run it back and hopefully get a home court advantage going into next season.
Can you believe Giannis Antetokounmpo was getting like $3 million this year for what he was able to do for this basketball team? Like, seriously.
He's going to get 22 next year. So,
Woo, talking about freak. Like, freak that money, boy. All right, you're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our Go On and Get edition of the Baseline NBA podcast. We just finished talking about the teams that got eliminated in the first round of the Eastern Conference. Now it's time to focus our attention on the teams in the Western Conference. First up, let's go ahead and focus on the Memphis Grizzlies. Listen, this is another interesting team, Shaw, that we talk about, like similar to the Atlanta Hawks, similar to the Indiana Pacers. When you look at this roster, you continue to wonder how much longer can they continue to play with this grit and grind effort. They weren't the most impressive, regular season basketball team. And you keep saying, how did they make it into the playoffs? And then you say to yourself, how did they freaking push the San Antonio Spurs to 6 games in the first round of the play? But that's exactly how the Memphis Grizzlies does. In the immortal words of Mr. Fizdale, take that for data.
All of the data, yo. And, again, Memphis did a great job in being competitive in that series against San Antonio. You just wonder if a healthy Tony Allen is there, if a healthy Chandler Parsons is there. What does that even mean for them? They probably don't even finish as a 7th seed. They probably finish a little bit higher, and they maybe have a bit better of a chance of getting out of the first round, obviously. For me, though, like I said, we've talked about them a couple weeks before the season ended. $95 million committed salary already next year. Zebo, 36 years old, will be 36 going into next year. Only made 10.3 this year. What is he going to get in his final maybe 2 or 3 year deal? Does he take some sort of a pay cut, hometown discount to stay with Memphis? Tony Allen, also 35 years old. What does he do? And then JaMychal Green as well, only made $980,000, just under $1 million last year. He's going to want a little bit of a raise too. I just don't know that Memphis is going to be able to keep all of these guys together from a salary standpoint. And for me personally, I'm a little just tired of seeing them do the same thing over and over again. But Conley, again, he's part of that community. Zebo is part of that community. So is Gasol. So you just know that they're going to run this back one way or the other. They're going to figure it out. Maybe they'll pay the luxury tax a little bit to get it done as well too. But you just don't know, is this team really a championship level team? They're a good team, especially in the Western Conference. Maybe in the East they'd probably have a little bit better of a chance. But I just don't really know that they can get much further than they have been.
Well, where do you look at, Shaw, as the most probable scenario to improve this basketball team that gives it not just a different look, but gives it a look where there is a little bit of championship fervor, so to speak? Like, I guess in ways I'm saying, the only way that I think that could ever occur is if Conley, plays at an MVP level. And even if he does, do you think that the Memphis Grizzlies organization will throw the kitchen sink at putting together whatever necessary pieces if something like that should occur, whether it's in the offseason or maybe sometime during a trade deadline, that they are capable of doing something to add on top of what would have to be an historically great season for Mike Conley. Because it's going to come down.
Historically great for Mike
Right,
Conley.
yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like, even for all of their efforts, they really still didn't do, and they really couldn't do anything to build up off of that, and I guess in many respects, that to me is the thing that worries me about this Grizzlies team is, where do you change the face of this team to give it that look that we're talking about?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. And I think it goes back to what we said, when we talked about them a couple of weeks ago. If they're going to need somebody internally to really develop, and whether that's James Ennis, whether that's Chandler Parsons finally getting his crap together and staying healthy for an entire season, and whether that's, a guy like Wade Baldwin now coming in and being able to kind of be that backup point guard behind Mike Conley, they may already have the guy there that really needs to develop. That might be the only way that they can get it done. Otherwise, like I said, it's just going to be kind of the same rinse, wash, and repeat. Hey, we're grit and grind. We're going to get 45 to 52 wins. We're going to be in the playoffs, and we're going to give you all the hell you can handle. But ultimately, what does that really yield? Other than, again, the extra little bit of playoff money revenue from the first round. Are you really a championship level contender? And I just don't see that in Memphis. Again, love this team, love this fan base and this organization. I just don't have that much to say about them because it really is the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, it's hard for us to kind of really delve into, because a lot of it is just going to be dictated on what we might expect to see from guys like Marc Gasol and Conley. I mean, listen, I don't know how much more Zach Randolph can give you. My goodness, how much more can Vince Carter give you? At some particular point, they're going to have to do something. While this basketball team is going to be, again, a successful basketball team, there's going to come a point where athleticism and talent is going to overtake just the pure grit and grind that they exhibit in the way that they play their basketball games. And they're going to have to find some upside in their talent. Guys like JaMychal Green, guys like, outside of Tony Allen, Harrison, if they believe that Andrew Harrison, clearly they missed the mark with Chandler Parsons and everything like that. But I just feel like at some particular point, the guys that they're drafting, they need to start showing you why they need to be in the NBA. Other than that, you're basically filling this roster with guys that you could have gotten from the D League and maybe have a more effective talent roster on the basketball court to help this Grizzlies team than what you're currently seeing at the moment. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and focus our attention on the next team on the Western side that had to go on and get, and that's being the Oklahoma City Thunder. Look, were we mesmerized by the play of Russell Westbrook? No question. Herculean effort, without a doubt. I think this more points to just how abysmal this roster is. And it's funny, during the course of this first round of the playoffs, and I was talking with, a couple of guys, at the gym that I go to and things of that nature. I said, this to me is a sure sign that there needs to be a roster shakeup for this Thunder team. Just me and my personal opinion. And it has to start with that front court. As much as I buy in the combination in the relationship between Billy Donovan and Russell Westbrook, I'm not buying into how Billy Donovan effectively uses his front court. I'm not buying into the move for Taj Gibson. I never bought into it. I'm not buying into this back and forth nonsense with Steven Adams and Enes Kanter. There needs to be some shakeup to legitimize that front court. I think that because of whatever's happened during the course of that season, it diminished the progression of Domantas Sabonis, who they drafted in the first round for the purposes of seeing there being this movement that's going to be headed by Russell Westbrook, maybe because they were afraid of, this historic run that he was making. But at some particular point, they got to do something with this roster, because what they have constructed right now, no matter how many times you replay this scenario, they're getting knocked out of the first round every single time.
Big questions in OKC. And, I hate to beat a dead horse when talking about the salary, but $112 million in committed salary already next year. Gibson is a free agent. Nick Hollison's a free agent. I know he doesn't play, so that doesn't matter. Andre Roberson's a free agent. And given what he showed towards the end there with his free throw shooting, I mean, maybe you let him go. But without that, they're already over the cap. So that lends to the question of, well, now do you have to move Cantor to create some space and try to get in maybe some younger pieces that can play alongside Westbrook? Do you target a guy like Blake Griffin for the Clippers? Do you target a guy like even JJ Redick from the Clippers to give you some shooting? I think the biggest thing here too, kind of like the case in Memphis, is that they're going to need a guy, where Memphis may have a couple of guys that they can look at. I think it starts with Victor Oladipo in terms of improving his game and really trying to live up to his draft stock that he had a couple of years ago. Well, I mean, we know you're not a big Vic fan, and I'm not even a big Vic fan at this point either. In terms of he just hasn't really done anything to really warrant all the hype that came into the year.
It's not even about him. It's not even about him being me being a big fan of Victor Oladipo. I think Victor Oladipo is a solid basketball player, but I've always believed that Victor Oladipo is a complementary player. And I even think that even for what they're trying,
but he can't be. But that's what they're saying. He can't be. I mean, I think we're both in the same boat with that. He is that, but he can't be. He has to emerge as a guy who's going to be making $21 million next year.
That's the problem. He is not. The Magic overvalued him. And maybe to some degree, it's I don't want to say, like, I'm not blaming Victor Oladipo for this. He was a first-round draft pick, and unfairly, he had to shoulder what happened with Dwight Howard, right? Because of what happened to Dwight Howard. But what I am saying is that Victor Oladipo, for what he brings to the table, for what Russell Westbrook would have needed and is going to need, Victor Oladipo, to me, should be the Kevin Love for our basketball team, meaning they need another piece. They need a 1B player. It can't be Victor Oladipo being the 1B player. He is not that player. He's not that guy. He's not.
Well, they don't have a whole lot of moves in order to bring somebody over there.
That is the truth. That's the shocking truth.
Right, and so that's when it comes down to Kanter's contract having to be moved in order to try to facilitate some sort of cap space, a trade exemption of some sort, to maybe to bring in somebody else and maybe sign that person long term. Nobody has any player options that they're going to opt out of. They have a team option, I think, with Jeremy Grant. They can decline that, save themselves 1.5, but that still doesn't get them under the cap. So that's an issue for them. And I don't know how they're going to get better this summer. But I will give Presti credit. He is a creative general manager. He's not afraid to make moves, and we saw that last summer. We saw that at the trade deadline. So I wouldn't count him out in terms of them trying to get maybe that 1B type of player to get to this roster. But right now, looking at the hard numbers, it seems like they're strapped, and it doesn't seem like a whole lot of improvements coming for Russell Westbrook next year.
Listen, I completely agree with you in every single thing that you said, Shaw, with the exception of one thing. The idea is that maybe Enes Kanter is the more movable player because obviously he holds the most money. For what the Oklahoma City Thunder want to do, I think Steven Adams is the guy that needs to get moved. Listen, man, I have a hard time trying to find where Russell Westbrook and Steven Adams are going to be an effective combination, or even if Victor Oladipo is there, he is an effective combination for those guys. Unless he starts to improve or starts adding something to his offensive game, or unless Billy Donovan really starts putting together something where the inside-outside game can work as easily as the outside-inside game works, having a guy like Russell Westbrook, Steven Adams is a liability for that basketball team. And you would be more suited to keep a guy like Enes Kanter. I think Enes Kanter is more effective under Billy Donovan's system and towards Russell Westbrook and his play than I would be seeing Steven Adams. But the problem is you got Steven Adams on the cheap. You're shelling out a hell of a lot of dough for Enes Kanter. So if you're trying to shake up the roster, Kanter is more likely the player to go. I'm just saying.
Adams ain't cheap. Adams going to get his extension kicks in next year. So $22 million, he's actually be making more than Kanter will be. It's just a perception of the defense that he provides and the ruggedness that he provides for OKC, while they're probably not going to entertain that. But I think to your point, I don't think anything can be off the table at this point, with the exception of moving Russ. So you're building around Westbrook, and you're trying to get somebody else in there to help him along. So I think even Oladipo, if you can fool somebody into trading for him, then yeah, I think they would look at that too.
But what?
Kanter and Adams all are owed over $20 million. Well, Kanter's owed 17.8. Adams is going to be owed 22.4 next year.
Right. Okay. But then you know what then, Shaw? If you make that play, then you can easily now plug Jeremy Grant. Because I think Jeremy Grant can offset Enes Kanter's defensive liabilities if he's going to be an offensive weapon to help offload the burden for Westbrook. Well, I'm just saying, because Jeremy Grant can play better defense on the wing than what you think that you're going to expect to get from Domantas Sabonis. So my whole thing is that, all right, if you keep Steven Adams, then you need to figure out a way to get Domantas Sabonis in that starting lineup he needs to be playing, right? If you're not going to go with that, you're still going to continue to sit Sabonis, or he's going to come off the bench, then you need to figure out what you're going to do with Steven Adams, because you can't leave him out there on an island because he's not going to give you anything on that front court. And listen, that was a clear-cut case. That first round against the Houston Rockets was a clear-cut case of this being about the backcourt and the absence of the front court for the Oklahoma City Thunder, which eventually led to them getting ousted in the first round very easily.
Yeah, I feel bad for OKC because, again, we just have to figure out how they're going to maneuver. Not even sure how many picks they have coming up in the draft. I had to look at that before we went on air here, and see if they can bring some young talent in here. But they obviously don't have any high draft picks. So unless they make a move to get, high into this draft upcoming, there's not a lot of help, at least on the horizon for them. So it is going to take a Sam Presti move of some sort of stroke of genius to make OKC better than they were last year. This past season.
Presto, changeo. That's what it's going to take, man. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cali, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our Go On Git edition, talking West Coast teams that have been ousted in the first round. All right, Shaw. The Portland Trailblazers swept. Not with us being mesmerized by the performance in the first game of Damian Lillard and CJ McCullough, but outside of that, they really had little to nothing to offer the Golden State Warriors. And, it just shows you, as great a move as it was to get Jusuf Nurkic, maybe even his efforts wouldn't have meant much of anything against that juggernaut of the Warriors. But it still it still kind of brings to light the fact that they do have some good things happening moving forward. They just got to figure a way to harness that momentum and drive that so that they have a better start to their season and execute well and finish well. Because like we said before, in our preseason show, we were talking about how this should have been the team winning the Northwest Division. Ultimately, it was kind of a split. But we said that, this Blazers team should be able to improve off of what they did this previous season. And they certainly had to fight their way to get in. Barely more so pulling a rabbit out of the hat move and getting Nurkic to help finish the way for them to get into the playoffs. But I think this combination of Lillard, McCollum, and Nurkic is something to look forward to in the future.
Yeah, you would hope that trio with a full season under their belts can do better than what Portland did. Especially, prior to getting Nurkic to come there before the trade deadline. This Blazers team is a good young team, but they lacking some starting pieces there. I think you're questionable at the 3 and 4 position. I think Mo Harkless is a nice guy. He's one of those guys who. But
he's like, he's a really nice guy. He's a really cool dude.
But I think he's a nice player. But I think he's a little bit overvalued by some in basketball Twitter. Oh,
I'll share my cafeteria lunch with the guy. Next.
Yeah, but is he an NBA starter? He should definitely be in the league. But do I want him as my starting small forward? I just don't think so. So wherever's like, the Magic gave up on him and whatever the case would be, like, okay, he's all right. Like, let's not make that big of a deal about him. And I don't think he's a starting caliber guy. Al-Farouq Aminu, same thing. Again, you player who plays defense.
You used to be an Al-Farouq Aminu. You favored him. I'm not saying you had a kind of man crush on this dude. I'm just saying you used to like the guy. You used to like it. You thought that he had some upside
in his role, and I was impressed with how he extended his game to be able to shoot the three a little bit better right now. But again, I think we've seen 2 years of this now in Portland, and he's not the answer. So here's where we're at. Festus Ezeli needs to come back and be healthy. And give them a nice presence behind Nurkic. But the rest of this is very up for grabs. So I'm going to lay this out really quick, and I'll let you go ahead and talk about the Blazers because we're running short on time here. We've got to get to this last team here. Portland has $141 million already committed in salary. That is absurd. They are already over the cap with the roster that got them the 8 seed this year and a first round sweep.
That's the most expensive 8 seed I think we've seen.
Woo!
Right? Yeah.
So
we thought that would have been the Chicago Bulls. Forget the Portland Trailblazers, right?
So without a doubt, moves need to be made. So I think you're going to look no further than Allen Crabbe and trying to get out of that $18.5 million that he's going to be owed next year. You're trying to get the hell away from that. Evan Turner, 17.1. You're trying to get out of that. Myers Leonard, 9.9. Mose Harkless, 9.6. Aminu, 7.3. You're trying to get rid of some of these deals one way or the other. How can the Blazers do that? Well, they have 3 first-round picks this year. So there is not a question in hell that they are going to be moving these picks and trying to package them with some players to try to shake loose some big-name guy that from another team that might be a little bit disheartened and trying to look for a fresh start. There's no reason for them to draft 3 guys in the first round this year, and their roster is already full. So Neil O'Shea and the Portland Trailblazers have to be busy. If they're not busy, this is the biggest farce that you've ever seen.
You guys lambasted me, right? You and our girl Tammy Richardson lambasted me, right, about Mr. O'Shea and his suspect moves in the offseason. And when I praised him for his move at the trade deadline to bring Jurčić. So now you're relying on O'Shea to be savvy enough, you know what I'm saying, to pull an O'Shea type deal in the offseason.
You can't
You're really confident about that?
You can't have $141 million of salary with this roster and then bring in 3 rookies on top of it. Like, what the hell are you doing? So if you're not trying to trade Crabbe and, 2 of those picks to try to, get some other type of level of talent in there, then you're doing it wrong. And I think that's where the Blazers are at right now. Lillard and McCollum are obviously a tandem that you can build around. And, some people have questioned that as well, too, whether you want to have 2 guys who don't play any defense as the foundation of your roster. But I think they're fine with it, and they're going to let this ride out for at least a little while longer with those 2 guys. It really is going to start with Crabbe, Turner, Leonard, Harkless, Aminu, even Ezeli potentially, maybe 2 or 3 of those guys getting moved along with some of the picks that they have.
You pretty much have summed up everything that I think I would have wanted to say about this. This roster needs a serious, overhaul outside of the 3, right? It's the money that's going to be the issue. And I agree with you, Shaw. I think that there has to be a decision that has to be made. You have this window of greatness with the combination of Lillard and McCollum. You cannot continue to supplement them with, half-ass parts. I begin to wonder about guys like Myers Leonard. He's been in the system for a few years now. To me,
why did they re-sign him?
I just, I'm beginning to wonder, like, what purpose does it serve that he's just only coming off the bench and you're only plugging him in because, Nurkic got injured and, you're trying to plug in Noah Vonleh, who's always been a question mark even when he was drafted. I just, they're just guys that are getting paid on this roster right now. That given what
guaranteed money,
given what the Portland Trailblazers have shown you, they're not going to do them any good unless these guys have this miraculous epiphany of playing better basketball. The greatness of what Lillard and McCollum can show you, I don't know if it's going to translate to most of these guys. Now, I will say this. Under certain circumstances, and I don't know if it's something where Evan Turner and Stotts need to sit down and figure this thing out. I think Evan Turner could be he's one of those guys, Shaw, that when you look at the rest of these guys on the rosters, he's exactly what they all should really be. The difference is that, for the money that Turner's getting paid, I think that there's too many expectations of him being so much more than what he's given you. Remember what he was doing for the Boston Celtics. The difference is he was doing it on the cheap, right? So now he's getting this ton of money. I just think he's getting lost in the roster because I don't know how much of the load Terry Stotts is really putting on Turner to do the things that he was doing for Boston that he could be doing for the Portland Trailblazers. I think I
think that's a great point. It's like when you bring a guy in here,
until you shake up some of this roster, you got to move the Crabbes and the Aminus and the Harklesses along because that's what you're already getting with Evan Turner right there.
Yeah, you want to bring somebody in to do what they do well. You don't want to change them and have them play a different role for your organization. You brought them there at 17 million or whatever it was, 17 million and change, because he was a nice facilitator who could hit the mid-range shot, and a guy who could, can start or come off the bench for you, but needs his minutes and needs the ball in his hand to be effective. And they tried to play him off the ball some to begin the year because McCollum and Lillard are so dominant, and he just didn't do well in that role. So that's where you just have to figure out from a coaching standpoint and from your front office what type of roster you're trying to build around. So Portland, although I think they're in good shape, they're still young, and you hope with Nurkic there as well that trio will be able to be better than they started this season. But again, they still have a lot of questions and they have to make moves. Again, there's just no choice. Moves have to be made. 141, 3 picks in the first round. You got to make something happen.
Definitely. Look, and last point too, Sean, it's something that I don't know if whether or not you may not have noticed this. It's something that I was trying to follow along and really kind of adhere to. I noticed that Evan Turner, I didn't see too much, camaraderie or closeness with Turner, McCollum, and Lillard this season. You follow Instagram. Evan Turner is posted up with other dudes on the roster and everything like that. He seemed to identify himself with quite a few of the different guys, and I didn't see him kind of acquaint himself too much, with Lillard and McCollum. It would be really interesting to see how these guys take this off season, because I really believe that the key to the roster is improving and selling on the idea that there's something worth coming here to based on those three guys making things work, because those are three of their best off the ball and on the ball handlers on that roster. So they're going to have to figure this thing out. And listen, for what, 16, 24, and then what's McCollum getting right now? He's going to get his extension. The money that's being thrown out at these three dudes, they definitely need to figure this thing out for sure. All right, so we definitely saved our best for last on this one. And obviously, because it took the Los Angeles Clippers 7 games before we can finally, and it's interesting that Isaiah Thomas used this against the Chicago Bulls when I think it's so apropos to be used for the Los Angeles Clippers. It's a wrap for these mother effers. That's just the best way that I can describe this whole thing, this experience of the Los Angeles Clippers, Doc Rivers, watching this basketball team get knocked out at home against the Utah Jazz, whom they worked so hard to get that 4 seed, to get that home game for the 7th game. And despite losing Blake Griffin, still found a way to muck up the joint and look unimpressive, unimaginably disappointing to everybody, even to the NBA community. Like, is this how you go out as Lob City? And I know a lot of people are going to be focused on this whole thing about Paul Pierce and stuff. I feel like Paul Pierce is just a buffer to what really should be the point of fixation, is that this basketball team has been so disappointing. And I say this now with great relief because they showed it to me in this game against the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, it's time, man. I think it is, and we'll see if they actually listen to, I guess, the pundits out there. And I know Doc Rivers, like, yeah, we've been hearing we're needed to break up for a couple of years now, and they do feel cheated that they haven't, with the exception of maybe 1 year, that they haven't really done anything with a fully healthy roster, and that's unfortunate. But again, we keep saying, I just, from an outsider looking in, this is a team that's snake bitten. And it just isn't working for whatever reason, whatever the luck is, whatever the karma is, whatever higher power, basketball power that you want to believe in, it's just not for you. You know what I mean? It's just not for you dudes out there in LA right now. And they've missed their opportunity, I think, to really be effective and to take this thing to the next level. Blake has his early termination clause, so does Chris Paul. JJ Redick is a complete unrestricted free agent, and chances are he's gone no matter what happens. Chances are. Mamute, he has a player option. Morris Speeds has a player option as well too. Felton's a free agent. Brandon Bass is a free agent. Some of these guys didn't even play. Allen Anderson's a free agent. There's just what are you coming back to if you're Doc Rivers and the Clippers organization? Like, what is it that you're coming back to at this point right now? Because it just seems like no matter what you do, at some point something else is going to happen. You have to overcome some sort of injury or some sort of adversity, even off the court. Blake Griffin punching the trainer last year or whatever it was. Like, it's just so much ridiculousness with this team, and it's tiresome. So for me, I want to see them just go their separate ways, one way or the other. I think all reports right now are Chris Paul will be back. He's 31. He's going to want to sign a max deal. Probably be his last contract there. But Blake Griffin, is 28 years old, and that's the big X factor. We don't know whether or not he'll be back. As I alluded to, Redick probably will not be. But for me, I'm done. I've had enough. And there's all kinds of rumors about Doc Rivers, whether or not he wants to come back and whether he'll be back as well too. I think when you have this type of mantra going on, it's time to just let set sail, man, and go on another path.
Hey, listen, man. Paul Pierce is done. Yeah. I think everybody is just done. We're all done, right? We're absolutely done. Look, I'm not gonna get too much into this. I think you pretty much have summarized a lot of how I feel about this Clippers basketball team. I think the most disappointing thing about this Clippers basketball team, Shaw, is that they never rose to what I thought their potential could possibly be. And it's really inexplicable because there's so many good parts that could have elevated that, right? You got the mindset and the mantra, the mystique of a Doc Rivers coaching you. You've got the bulldog attitude of Chris Paul. You got that, Texas no holds barred, just real shout it out to the world, even though he sucks at the free throw line, DeAndre Jordan and you got this larger than life, athletic phenom in Blake Griffin. And all of this should be the makings of a dominant basketball team within the stretch of 3 to 5 years where they should have been at least one NBA Finals, right? I mean, and it wasn't like the window of opportunity wasn't there to do it. They've had 2 bites at this apple, to even get to the conference finals, let alone an NBA Finals, and it's just not worked. And there just comes a point where you don't look at this team like the Memphis Grizzlies. You don't look at them as the Atlanta Hawks with so much turmoil and controversy and craziness that goes on with this LA Clippers team. Not to mention that you are the sister team to the Los Angeles Lakers. You really can ill afford to say that mediocrity is okay for this franchise. You have to do something, and they should have done something, and they really have not done anything except play up to teasing the fan base and the idea that they could be something bigger and better. And it's just not the case. This team needs an absolute overhaul. And when I say overhaul, I mean by it can't be these same 3 guys. And I mean, I think to some degree, even Chris Paul recognizes that. I think even Blake Griffin recognizes that. DeAndre Jordan might be a little befuddled, because remember, he almost found himself playing for Dallas when he said, "Ha ha, fool you," right? But outside of that, man, the only way that I can surmise what occurred, what this all means is this is the curse of Glenn Baby Davis. That's it. That's all I can say. The curse of Glenn Baby Davis is exactly the reason why the Los Angeles Clippers have not lived up to expectations.
Well, the final note I'll have on it too is just, well, not even no, it's just a question I think for you, just in yes or no. Do you think Doc Rivers will be back?
Yes, I think he'll be back because of Chris Paul, but I don't think that he will be back if Chris Paul decides to move on.
Okay. I think that's fair. And I think they have a relationship that might extend a little bit past some of the other guys on this roster. So yeah, I think that's an accurate.
And don't be surprised
too.
if Chris Paul has an ear, doesn't give an ear into Doc Rivers about who he wants on this roster to stay.
Oh yeah, there's that, and who they may try to bring over one way or the other.
Right.
Especially if Blake opts out, then they'll have a little bit of cap space. So then, do they try to facilitate something for, again, that Carmelo Anthony business that we've heard so much about? Melo and Chris Paul have that relationship as well too. So I think if there was one major change that would happen, I wouldn't be shocked to see the Clippers swap out Blake for Chris Paul. And not to say that that's an upgrade in any way, shape, or form, because it's not. But it is just something different, and maybe it might yield them different results.
Let me ask you this question, even though it might not be realistic, and I know we're running really short on our timetable here with this show. Would karma really play itself out like this? Like the Clippers get knocked out of the first round, thus forcing Chris Paul, Doc Rivers to reassess whether or not they're planning to stay. Chris Paul elects that he's going to stay on the premise that he gets Doc Rivers to figure out a way to get Carmelo Anthony. You gut the team. And then the Cleveland Cavaliers lose in an embarrassing fashion to the Golden State Warriors. Does that not open up the opportunity for LeBron James to start thinking about what he wants to do in his final run, whether to stay in Cleveland and maybe possibly find himself playing for the Los Angeles Clippers to do something great there?
Well, I mean, you've gone full conspiracy with that, man.
Is that not conspiracy theory, baby? Come on.
The
wheels are turning on Sunday for me, boy. I tell you that right now.
You've gone way out there, and I'm gonna let you have that one. I'm not too sure.
You'll let me marinate on that a little bit. Let me soak in the conspiracy juices on that one. I'm just saying.
There's a lot of moving parts with that, but I will say this: is that if nothing else, like the great thing about all these things that could happen is that we'll know who our NBA champion is before, free agency comes to fruition and what teams need to do. We'll know who our NBA champion is before the draft takes place and all of that. So, what happens in the rest of these playoffs could have lasting effects on the teams that were ousted here in the first round. And obviously will have a lot of impact on the teams that didn't make the playoffs altogether. So at this point, everything is kind of up for conversation, and we'll see how the rest of the summer treats us, man. But that's a wild one, man. So we'll see what goes down.
It's a very, very wild one. All I can say is this: Stephen A., are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Awesome show, Shaw. Listen, man, the rundown to all of these teams getting knocked out in the first round, and certainly this will not be the last conversation that we will have discussing their futures, because we're gonna have to, chronicle what's going on with these guys as we lend to the offseason, we get to the draft, we get to the spring training. to get to the summer leagues, and then we get to the OTAs. So there's going to be a lot of stuff happening between now and then. Just because their season has ended doesn't mean their season has ended. Certainly a lot of things to look at moving forward. Awesome show, Shaw. Any parting thoughts on all of our guys who are going to get a lovely parting gift of Velveeta liquid gold on their way out the door of this NBA season?
Hey, man, enjoy your summer vacations. We'll see what's good. Work hard. Hope to see you back next year and playing great basketball. I think it's Robert Littal from BSO. He's always saying they're going to go on vacation with their Instagram models and all of that. So yeah, I think it's going to be an amazing season. So and maybe we'll see some of them showing up at Summer League as always. Maybe I think Jalen Rose said Paul Pierce could join the Big Three league here. 3-on-3 league. Ice Cube is starting, maybe kind of last minute if you were so inclined. A lot of great stuff to discuss over the summer, man. But this was an amazing show, and it's sad to see some of these teams go. But it is what it is, man. And, hey, we got to keep it moving in the NBA playoffs.
Definitely. In the immortal words of our people from Velveeta, to all of our teams who did not make it past the first round.
Go on Git!
For the baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. Be sure to check out our semifinal round predicts on our previous show. It's already up and posted. Be sure to get at us on all the available platforms: iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, iHeartRadio, Google Music, Roku, available on all those. Download us, allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. For the baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do, and we'll catch up with you next time.